And thank you both for being here. This is fun. My name is Jonathan Best. I am a resident atheist. I'm actually part of a group that meets here at Edison College every month called the Free Inquiry Group of Southwest Florida. And we're a group of atheists and agnostics, as well as humanists. There's really a lot of labels that are thrown around: rationalists, skepticists, things like that. And so we get together just to get together as a group and to share ideas and be a group and experience the everything that's great about being in a group. Also to sort of promote some of the things that we care about and feel passionately about. Many of us are humanists and are pushing for advancing the human race in general and helping promote individual happiness and happiness as a planet as well. But fundamentally, we're atheists. We don't believe in God or gods, and we're skeptical, I guess, so to speak. Some of our goals are we're pushing for a more secular America, primarily governmentally. We are hoping that the First Amendment will be enforced and recognized, and that people will recognize what a benefit it has been to this country to keep government and religion two separate things, so that people can worship and do what they want religiously, and also have the government free to do its own thing without imposing someone else's beliefs on somebody else, and we think that's very important. We're also pushing for a more secular world. We'd like to see more governments out there modeled after a Bill of Rights, and laws put into place through democracy and debate, rather than laws that are there based on an ancient holy book, such as what they had in Afghanistan under the Taliban. So those are some of the things we're pushing for. I'm here representing that group. I guess I'm also here representing myself, so I should tell you a little bit about myself. I guess I'm sort of a unique atheist. I was born and raised in Utah, which is obviously the heartland for the Mormon religion. I was born and raised Mormon. All of my family still is Mormon. So I have a pretty good knowledge of not just Christianity, but also the Mormon faith. I guess I'd also feel left out if I didn't mention a spiritual experience, since we've heard a couple of those already. But I've also had spiritual experiences as well. I mean, when I was young, I prayed about the Book of Mormon and felt arms wrapping around me in an empty room, which was a very powerful experience for me. And for me, that absolutely confirmed that the Book of Mormon was an accurate book, that ancient America was full of white Jewish people, and that God came from a planet called Kolob. This was my mindset for many years. I lived in a very insular religion, and everybody around me pretty much was an echo chamber, just telling me that this is what's accurate, and people out there just don't get it. Eventually, I came to the conclusion, after finding evidence, that this concept of Joseph Smith restoring this gospel and translating these books is absolutely incorrect, and it's been shown to be very inaccurate. And I was able to let go, which is also a unique thing. There are many people in this world who they are raised in this tradition, and it's very, very difficult for them to let go of that. I was able to do that 5 years ago, and so here I am as an atheist today. So, again, I'm here representing atheists. I could say a lot about many different things, but I think I'll just leave it at that and let you guys ask any questions of us that you are curious about. Religions are fundamentally the same. They've got a story, and they follow that story regardless of evidence, and that they fundamentally believe rather than letting the evidence do the talking. That's why you can have a Muslim and a Christian and a Hinduist in a room, and they can argue endlessly and never come to any sort of consensus, because they're each just going to argue the position that they were given by their parents or their friends or whoever brought them into their religion. Whereas a more rational point of view, which I've always considered myself rational, even remarkably when I believed that God came from a planet called Kolob, I recognized that this really wasn't rational to give the locally popular religion a special case, to say that Zeus is fake because there's no reason to believe that there is such a God. But my God, since I was raised with this, he's got to be real. That's just not being rational and fair. So if we step back and let the evidence do the talking, we'll find that spiritual experiences occur around the world. They spawn many different religions. And fundamentally, they're all based on this idea, which you're kind of hinting on, this idea that there is a reality outside reality, that there's a reality on the inside, and that's the real reality. I think it's very important to make a distinction between this idea that there is, that this inner reality is the real reality. There's a subjective reality, and then there's an objective reality. When we come to science, we're talking about the objective reality. We're going to put our preconceptions aside, we're going to test things, and if we can continue to reproduce something, then guess what? We've got a cure for polio. So all of our preconceptions aside, let's let the evidence do the talking. When you talk about a spiritual inner journey and where you're finding truth inside, that's entirely subjective, and I think it's very important to realize that that is subjective only. You can go to a doctor named Persinger in Canada, and he can give you a religious experience. He can tickle your temporal lobe with electrical waves, and you may be kneeling at the feet of Jesus, or you may be talking with your long-dead ancestors. Or some people's temporal lobes simply aren't, they're not sensitive enough to experience, they won't feel much. But whatever you experience is really a subjective thing, and it's not to say that the outside world really is this way. I mean, we've all known people who have said outlandish things and absolutely believed them. People who thought they were Napoleon, absolutely. People who thought they'd give birth to the Son of God. There was recently a woman who had temporal lobe epilepsy, and during one of her episodes, that's absolutely what she believed. It doesn't mean that that's accurate about the objective world, only that that's what you're perceiving, and what your perception is doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what's the objective reality.
I'm actually talking about objective scientific truth. So,
about what specifically?
Evolution is an easy thing to look at or observe. There's scientists who have looked at the same set of evidence and said that, yes, Darwin's theory is true, but he took a theory that applied, how does the concept of a bird mutating to the origin of man. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, if we're going to talk specifically about evolution, there's a question that you're answering with evolution, and that question is, where did we come from? Where did humans come from? Where did everything come from? How did we come from being small, tiny creatures, as what evolution would say, starting from a single cell, and branch out into the great diversity that we see around us? And again, I'm going to say that the rational thing to say, if you don't understand the process by which a single cell becomes something as complicated as a human being, the rational thing to say is, I don't know, and to leave it at that, not to inject whatever the locally popular story is about how that occurred. Now, that being said, we know an awful lot about it. In fact, every one of you here started as a single cell floating down a fallopian tube. And, you were one of a million sperm that got in there, and you divided from a single microscopic cell into everything that you are today. And there really is no magic or mystery about that. We understand it has to do with just basic chemical laws. This chemical causes this chemical to do this, and they divide and so on and so forth until we get tissues and organs and so on. So it is well known, it is well understood, it is complicated, and not everybody understands it. But fundamentally, I think you have to step back and realize that if we're trying to answer this question and we don't understand the answer, the rational answer is not to say, well, I believe this or I believe that, but step back, let the evidence do the talking, and to say, I don't know if we really don't.
At the core of this, where's that come from?
That's
from a scientific standpoint.
Well, from a scientific standpoint, first we could step back and say, we don't understand everything about that. And let's just step back, leave our preconceptions aside, and say that. First,
could we agree that the consciousness is there?
No.
There's no consciousness that moves that cell to reproduce?
Is there any evidence that there is?
Well, you're here, aren't you? I mean,
well,
if there's no consciousness,
divides.
we know it divides. Well, something has to be at that core in order to initiate that, is what I'm getting at.
Chemicals are there. That's
okay, well, the chemical. Well, what's in the chemical? I'm talking about that formless consciousness that's at the core of science.
See, but that's, you're bringing your own preconception, saying that there's got to be some sort of consciousness that causes the cell to divide. That's a preconception.
Then what would do it, other than a conscious
chemical reaction?
Chemical reaction.
We can put, for example, I mean, a lot of people.
Jonathan, if I may, let me jump in here, because this is the real challenge, isn't it? We get on a fine point, and if we had two-person setting.
This is something that everybody has, and in fact primates have, and in fact even dogs have. This is just the natural urge to not do to somebody else what you wouldn't want done to you. Just to give you an example, there's a thought experiment that's been performed many times on many different people. Here's the experiment is a train's coming down the track. It's going to hit 6 workers on the track unless you do something. There's a switch, and if you switch the track, you'll send it to the other track and it will kill 1 worker instead of the 6. So do you switch the track? You flip the switch. Most people, regardless of their religions, without having to consult a Bible or Quran or anything else, will just automatically know, well, it would be tough, but I would flip the switch because at the end of the day, it's better to have 1 fatherless home than 6 fatherless homes. So, so that's the first thought experiment. The second is, same scenario, the train's coming down the track, 6 people are going to die. This time you're on a bridge, and there's a very large man leaning over that bridge, and if you give him a little shove, he's going to fall down and stop the train. In this scenario, do you push the man? And again, they've asked this to many different people, and people overwhelmingly seem to say, no, I won't do that, even though mathematically it's the same question, or you can sacrifice 1 to save 6. Instinctively, people just have this feeling, I can't do that to somebody. I can't push somebody like that. And so, while our instinctive morality isn't perfect, I mean, it's not consistent, so to say, but it is there. You'll find it in atheists, you'll find it in Christians, you'll find it in pretty much anybody except for antisocial people. Those are the people to worry about who don't have that natural instinctive urge to do what's right and wrong. So that's the first kind of morality, this instinctive morality, and we all get it. The code of ethics, or a code of conduct, is a different thing entirely. And we have people with the Bible who say that that's their code of ethics, or the Quran, or other books. And the atheists do not have a code of ethics, so to speak. But if we look back through history at the codes of ethics, I mean, you can look at the Old Testament and find some really horrible things in there about what we should do when you have a disobedient child. Well, you stone him to death. Or a woman who isn't a virgin on her wedding night, you stone her to death. There's all sorts of horrible things in the Old Testament, which I think is why a lot of Christians are happy to brush that aside and concentrate on the New Testament, which is much nicer. But it's still, even the New Testament has no problem with slavery. It totally condones it, as does the Quran. So these are ancient codes of ethics that were put together typically a long time ago by a prophet who had some sort of experience. And people who follow those are sort of stuck in time. They're stuck thousands of years ago. And they're not wonderful codes of ethics. It took a man like Abraham Lincoln, who was described as often very much an atheist, who stood up and said, well, I think that we should no longer enslave people. And many other people agreed, and it became a democratic movement that had to change the law. And so we have a code of ethics that's a secular code of ethics here in the United States. It's the Constitution, it's the Bill of Rights. These things were put together through discussion, through democratic process, and through protecting individual rights. And I think that sort of a secular document, secular ethics, is far preferable to an ethics that was derived by some person long ago that cannot be questioned just by virtue of the fact that it was said by someone who has a pipeline to God, so to speak.
Okay, so you've been very